Welcome to the Zachrilege Cast podcast, YouTube video interview program that features me talking to some of the best and brightest in the atheist slash secular slash awesome community. This is episode number 130. What do you do for episode 130? You do a show. I am recording live on February 6, 2018. I would like to thank Secular Yakking for quitting their podcast and sending me all their Patreons. Just kidding. They quit. They didn't do that last part. Also, I was on last week's No Religion Required finale, and of course, Bobby's equipment broke right when I called in. You can't make this stuff up. I just had to say I've officially outlasted 2 more atheist podcasts, so watch out, the rest of you. So, at least in Minnesota, they have a temperature-based reason for their equipment not working. I was on this week's Atheist Talk Radio podcast. It's episode number 439, so come for my near-death experience, stay for Maddie Love's amazing radio voice, and Hertzie's cat commentary. So yes, an atheist can say spiritual without getting hit by atheist lightning. Is that a thing? Well, tonight I bring on Dr. Jessie Rabinowitz, psychologist of the non-stars, father of Aaron Rabi, can't pronounce his name, even though it's the shortened version, Gestalt therapy ninja, and beat poet knowledge guy. Got a couple of out-of-context quotes. I thought it would be inappropriate in that setting on that day, and don't sue me. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. Good to be here.
This is definitely the first father of a guest interview that I've done. So, we're a multi-generational show.
There you go. Open up to all the generations.
And I will disappoint my audience by only drinking water tonight. Blame the Super Bowl. I drank as much as the average Eagles fan on Sunday, starting with my 10 a.m.
Wow.
Berliner Weiss flavored with guava and passion fruit. Shit, I already put the audience to sleep. I hear you have a special beverage for tonight.
I do. I've been saving this. This is the Mount Defiance Distillery Absinthe Superior. Mount Defiance Distillery is in Virginia, where I live, and it's made from all Virginia ingredients, grown in Virginia. And it's a somewhat higher end absinthe than what I normally drink, so I was excited to try it tonight.
Well, that's definitely a first absinthe on the show. I know I've had a couple of wine drinkers. I think we've had some mixed drinks, but people tend to go on the beer journey with me. But
yeah.
Absinthe is good. So the bottle will be gone by the end of the episode. So that's a good prediction.
I think not.
If
the bottle was gone by the episode, I'd be on the way to the hospital.
That's a high percentage of alcohol in that one, right?
Yeah, it's 140 proof. So what is that? 70% alcohol?
Ooh, yeah.
Pretty strong. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say 3 sips and I'd be on the floor.
Well, you dilute it with water.
Ah.
You don't drink it straight. I mean, I guess you could, but you'd go blind and mad.
Well, blind and mad, but maybe write the great American novel while you're passed out.
Right before.
Unlikely, but
right before
awesome.
You die. Yeah, absolutely. Just to add a little bohemian touch tonight, go with the absinthe.
Exactly. Well, normally I start the show by asking about, a blog or podcast, but of course, you're well above such things. So can you do an elevator pitch for your day job?
I'm a clinical psychologist in Richmond, Virginia. I've been in practice since 1985. I'm a generalist. I see all kinds of adults. I'm a Gestalt therapist originally by training, but I also do or have been influenced by a whole boatload of body-centered therapies. And then also tons and tons of mindfulness. As I've gotten involved in mindfulness, that's been a part of the practice quite a lot. Does that mean anything to you? Any of that?
So if there's body-centered therapy, does that mean you have to stretch before you go in?
No, you stretch while you're in. It's working not just with thought or not even just with feeling, but also body sensation, breathing, movement, posture, stance, where we hold tension in our bodies, how we block emotion, shit like that. It's fun.
So you can probably just watch the way I ask questions and probably know way too much about me after an hour.
Yeah, I was gonna tell you about that later, but
We'll say that for the Patreon people, right?
No. You do, watch people's nonverbals and stuff, but I'm too nervous being on your show to actually be paying attention to you. You have to understand.
Oh, good. Got to throw you off. I like that. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
like that, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Between me and the absinthe, I mean, come on, it's going to be great.
I think it's going to be great, man. No, I think it's going to be great. Yeah. Yeah.
So of course, you've been on Embrace the Void because, I
have an in.
You know Aaron, and he's not going to make. I asked him to not critique the lighting in your kitchen because it is his professional gig.
Right.
So you've done this on Embrace the Void, and you actually probably described it to me 10 minutes ago, and when we just talked, kind of pre-talk last night. But the difference between psychiatry and psychology, and just let me say also that I have had some trouble spelling a lot of things that we're going to talk about tonight.
Okay. Psychiatry, you get a med school degree, and then you take a residency in psychiatry. And psychiatrists in America mostly do medication management now. Much fewer of them do talk therapy. Psychology, you get a PhD in grad school in psychology, and you do talk therapy or like body therapy or all that stuff. And psychologists will do psychological testing too, although I don't do that anymore. But that's kind of the difference.
Well, when did you decide to be the latter? When did you decide this is a career track for me?
I was a theater student at Binghamton in the mid-'70s. And about 3 years in, I started watching my friends graduate and go to New York, and I started seeing what they were doing and what their lives were like. And I got scared because I knew I was too middle class for this life, because it's a hard life, theater. You have to be willing to live poor and do a lot of other jobs. And more than anything, the idea of the constant rejection, I think I probably was, I was not sufficiently committed to it. So I freaked out and took a psychology course, and that sort of seemed interesting and not too far off of theater, some of it, in terms of the stuff we learn as actors. And so I had a mentor, and he said, "Oh, you should be a clinical psychologist." And I said, "Oh, I don't know what that is." He said, "Don't worry, you should go and do that." So I applied to some schools, and I went in, and, the rest is history. It's the feel-good story of the century.
And how clearly nepotism, which we frown upon in the atheist community, you made an exception to be on Embrace the Void.
Right.
So even though you're like a Patreon supporter of the show, they seem to be stealing a lot of your ideas for show ideas, at least in the early part. But when was the decision made for you to be on the show, and what did you talk about?
Well, Aaron started the show after the election, and I don't know. We just started talking about what he was going to do and what he was going to have on there. And I think we had talked about Trump's narcissism. And so he just, at some point said, "Oh, we should do that. We should do it." So we did 2 parts on narcissism. And, that fit pretty well because this guy is world class. You don't get to see many pure type narcissists, but this guy's he's a laboratory specimen. I wish.
Did you, I guess, learn anything that you didn't know before when you kind of studied up for this, or did you just, off the top of your head? I mean, that's probably what most people can do because there's plenty of material.
Yeah, no, the material about narcissism I knew already because I'd known narcissists. I had worked for bad narcissists, and so I'd learned all about that. I did research the Goldwater Rule, the big flap that happened after Barry Goldwater, who was a candidate for president in '64, was publicly spoken of by mental health professionals as being too unstable for the job of president. And he sued, I think he sued them. He may have sued the APA. I'm not sure. He sued them and won $75,000 settlement. And the American Psychiatric Association made this rule and said, no, you can't do that. You can't diagnose a public figure if you haven't interviewed them personally and done the proper diagnostic interview and obviously got releases and stuff. So I had to research that so we could talk about why it might be okay to talk for a mental health professional to talk about narcissism and Trump.
Yes, you had to thread the legal needle in a way, but
Yeah.
how do you analyze someone that you haven't talked to, interviewed in person?
Well, that's part of what we talked about. You know, originally the Goldwater Rule came out and they said you can't possibly know who a person is just from their public persona. The thing about it is there is so much material on Trump, by people who know him, writing, interview, video. There's more material on him out there than most mental health professionals will ever get in an interview, you know, over hours and hours and hours. And so you can make a reasonable guess. Doesn't mean you're diagnosing him. You're not going to bill insurance for the diagnosis. You're not treating him. But you can, in my opinion, as a mental health professional who's also a public citizen, you're allowed to opine based on what you know about a subject in relation to something going on in current events. Scientists talk about climate change. Accountants talk about, or financial guys talk about what's happening in finance. There's no reason that psychologists, psychiatrists can't have opinions, you know, based on what they see. With someone like Trump, this is not exactly a hard guess to make about what motivates him. You know, he's as textbook narcissist as it gets. You really don't see pure types, and he's a pure type.
Well, you mentioned in the two-part special, and you should still listen to it, and I'll include links in the show notes, of course. What do you remember the categories? That's lots for you to remember because there are like 10 of them.
I mean, you know, the big ones are a grandiose view of self, a sense of entitlement, a sense of personal specialness, a lack of empathy for anybody else's needs but one's own, the willingness to exaggerate, lie in service of maintaining one's false self. Oh, shoot, what else? Those are kind of the big ones, you know. Everything you see every day, that's your textbook. This guy will be taught for generations. He's your textbook of narcissism. The thin-skinnedness, always looking for slights, remembering slights and revenging those slights. The bouts of rage. The unwillingness to have relationships with people unless they're shining positively on him. You know, that's all just, you know, brand name narcissism.
But generally speaking, I guess with someone who has that personality,
yeah,
is it generally more harmful to the person who has it or to the people in their lives?
No.
Clearly, with someone who has a nuclear button, that's a little different situation. But
yeah, no, the thing with narcissism is that they tend to destroy other people more than themselves. They have terrible times when a spouse walks out, when they're fired from a job, you know, when something disastrous happens and their false self is shattered briefly and they feel like a piece of shit, you know, which is what they're trying not to feel like with the grandiosity. But they usually reconstitute their defenses. If there's someone like Trump, they reconstitute their defenses almost immediately. I always joke that I don't see a lot of narcissists in my practice, but they send me a lot of patients, you know, because they just damage the fuck out of people.
I have a question from the audience. So can you discuss narcissism versus borderline personality disorder?
Sure. Now remember, diagnoses are handy approximations, not ironclad categories. So there's lots of crossovers. Narcissists and borderline, some believe, exist on a bit of a spectrum. It basically has to do with narcissists defend against humiliation and feeling like a piece of shit by being grandiose. And the really good narcissists are really good at that, and their defenses keep them in the frame that I described. People with borderline personality disorder also have horrible self-esteem, but their defenses are not as tight. And so they're much more prone to deep depression, self-injurious behavior. They have the rage that narcissists show. They show rage as well. They are more prone to dissociation, which is a kind of mental defense where you sort of go away from what's here and now. Some people with borderline are a little more prone to that. Narcissists are very, very well-defended people, people who have borderline personality disorder can go from being really functional and really defended and then just fall in a chasm and just be in a very primitive state. How's that?
Pretty good. I think you have a future.
Thank you. I have a past, that's for sure. And it's checkered and paisley.
But didn't you mention in the show that the person who helped write, I can't remember what the manual is that describes
Allen,
what narcissism is as a diagnosis, was trying to say that Trump didn't qualify? What's the reasoning there? I'm sure you probably don't agree, but it's out there, right?
Alan Francis is his name, and he's a big guy in psychiatry, and he was one of the big people writing the narcissism and I think the other personality disorders. I don't get his logic. I don't get his reasoning. He says, obviously he repeats that we shouldn't be diagnosing people. We should argue with people in politics on the issues, and that's cool. But he says there's no sign that when you have a personality disorder, it should cause you great stress and problems in your life. And he says Trump doesn't seem to have that. I think that's not true. I think Trump makes a mess of his life constantly, and it causes him tons of stress, lawsuits, the whole boatload of horrible shit that comes out every day about him. So I don't really know, except that Francis has a book out, and the book is about this. And so I think he may be pushing his point that it's more important to call out politicians based on what they do rather than classifying them as mental disorders as if somehow that gives you the right to remove them from office. And I agree with that. I think it's a dangerous, dangerous thing for mental health professionals to presume that we have any right to remove somebody from office or even to recommend it, because that's a very slippery slope. Our biases would get involved. I just disagree with him about whether Trump, he says that Trump, you shouldn't call him a narcissist, he's just a terrible person. But frankly, narcissistic people typically act like terrible people a lot of the time. I don't see the real distinction he's making.
Yeah, I feel like there's plenty of history, like the being married multiple times, and we already know he had an affair like right after he got married the last time, and the bankruptcy, almost making like an entire city go bankrupt. And
oh yeah, anything to serve his ego, man. Even nuclear war. Sorry, didn't mean to bring that up, but these
good thing this isn't in a month, so we can say, haha, you're right.
Oh yeah, that would suck. That's a prediction I don't want to have come true.
But if you had an offer to, and I don't have the right term, interview or evaluate Trump, would you do it? I mean, I know you kind of talked about bias, but would it be fascinating for you, or you think it'd be hard for you to do?
Oh no, I wouldn't do it. No, it would be unethical for me to do it. By now, you should see my bias is as big as Trump's ego, which is probably says something about my psychodynamics. You can't come into an interview situation. He inspires murderous rage in me. That's not an unbiased, neutral place to evaluate someone from. I just want to kill the guy. Not really, but
as a public citizen, no, I'm just kidding.
Narcissists.
Either way,
narcissists inspire rage in people. They truly do, and so I've had enough of it in my life, and now watching him put us through this national, year of stress trauma. There's no way I could be neutral about that. Not to mention that I'm not that crazy about being in his presence. He's pretty disgusting.
It would seem like for some reason, if Trump were evaluated, it would have to become like a reality show where he would he would look at the camera like, look how great I just answered that question. God,
that's so fucking awfully true. You're absolutely right.
Honestly, my theory on Trump is, if he does get impeached, any jail sentence should just be him doing every reality show. Like he has to do the British baking show, he has to do some kind of therapy thing, and he has to still think that he's president even though he's not.
Oh, you're much more kind than I am. I think scrubbing toilets wiping people's asses. There's a character in Even Cowgirls Get the Blues who's a narcissistic fashion designer, and he's really a misogynist. And this is a spoiler alert in case you're going to read Cowgirls. His denouement, his sort of karma at the end of the book is that he gets brain damaged and he ends up washing out bedpans and taking care of women's private parts. He's been a big seller of women's female deodorants because he thinks women are disgusting smelling. And so that's his karma. So I think something like, that for Trump. Or if you've ever seen the film The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, which is very much about who Trump is, that character meets with a grisly end that would be perfectly fitting for Trump.
Although it only qualifies as the last one, and I don't want to know about that last part. Actually being able to do something. Okay, this is actually a version of the question that Aaron sent me before, but he wants to switch things up, what I think is great.
He's needling his father.
Your personal opinion, this is as a public citizen, which is better, the Apocalypse Now redo or the Godfather Saga, the sequential re-edit? Ooh, I don't think I've seen that one.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I thought he was going to lob me something easy. That's pretty tough.
I assume you're fans of the Apocalypse Now, probably as it's originally constituted, and of course the first two Godfather movies.
Yeah.
Maybe not the rest.
That's really hard. Why should I have a forced choice like that? I mean, the Godfather Saga is beautiful because it's sequential. So you start with De Niro and it goes all the way through, and it doesn't go into Godfather 3, thank God. And it's
so it's just the first two. Oh, okay.
It's the first two, but stitched together sequentially with some added stuff in it, which of course is always great, stuff that wasn't in either of the originals. And it's of course beautifully restored. Apocalypse Now Redux is phenomenal because it has the French plantation sequence. It's got a bunch more Brando. It's got some Willard stuff in it that sort of makes Willard kind of a fun guy, and he's pretty cold in the original, and it is beautifully restored in Technicolor. It's just a moving lithograph. It's so beautiful. There you go, Aaron. I'm making no choice.
So each one's like 7 hours long?
Redux is about 4 hours, and the Saga is about 6 hours, the Godfather Saga.
But could you have a talk to what was it? Who's the director of Apocalypse Now? I can't remember his name.
Coppola.
He kind of lost his mind after Apocalypse Now.
Doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was sort of out there. Yeah, there's a good documentary about the making of Hearts of Darkness. And yeah, he was out there. So what was the question?
We'll get to questions.
All right, it's free associating now.
Let me throw out, since I only wrote one live read, I'm just going to do one, and I'm sad. I did actually get the music from Atheist Talk. It was one of my favorite parts of doing the show this week, was that they had that music because they're a radio show. So they almost play you off like you're on the Oscars. So I was like joking, like, and I want to thank my cat's therapist. I want to thank my wife. I want to thank.
Right.
I promised I had less stuff written down. We'll just skip that and go straight to it. So live read one. Now that No Religion Required is gone and Bobby and Ashley are still supporting this show, technically I don't have to give them any love because they don't really have a show. But there's still hope after faith with the best hair in atheism, Jerry DeWitt. So check that show out. I believe they are posting it the same time as No Religion Required, 8 o'clock on Wednesdays. But either way, check that show out. It's the Frasier of Atheist podcast spin-off concepts.
You got a good pitchman deal there, man. That's pretty good.
I try.
Yeah, it's good. It's very musical.
Very musical. So is it tougher or easier as someone who's a professional to get to like know yourself or analyze yourself?
As you mean as a psychologist? It's easier because
as a human being.
It's easier because you're encouraged to, if you have the right training, you're encouraged to do a lot of therapy, and you have to find out your own shit so that it doesn't get in the way too much when you're working with people, because it's going to get energized when you're working with people. So I think it's easier. I think we're invited to, and we're given like we're in that, it's such a weird fucking rarefied profession. You sit in a room and people just come in and start talking about their stuff, and you talk with them and you feel with them. I mean, that's a crazy ass profession, you know. I'm very lucky. Who does that? That's crazy stuff to do, you know. So yeah, you get to like think about your issues and, you know, try not to be too big a jerk, and, you know.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of kind of crazy or putting yourself out there, have you always had an affinity for beat poets?
Oh, so, you know, I went to college in the 70s, you know, so beat poets, Eastern philosophy, psychedelics it was in the curriculum, you know, like you had core courses and those kind of things. So I probably started reading the beats when I was in college, like most people. You know, I read Kerouac, and then I started reading Ginsberg. And like most people at that time, they, you know, completely spoke to me. Not just those guys, Brautigan too, who was sort of a post-beat, you know, Vonnegut, Joe Heller, people like that. But yeah, I had a special affinity for Ginsberg. Yeah.
So what was the inspiration for you, because you had that theater background, I guess, to decide, oh yeah, one man Allen Ginsberg show, that sounds like a good idea?
He died in '97. I had used a poem of his in college for an audition piece, and it really was like, it was the thing I was most pleased about in college of all the acting, was this little audition piece, because his poems are meant to be out loud, you know. They're written in what's called long line form, so they're written for the breath. Ginsberg was a Buddhist, and he was writing for the length of breath, you know, because he believed in it as a lyric chanting kind of a medium. And so I started listening to him after he died, listening to recordings, and I thought, I hadn't done theater since I was in college because my schedule doesn't really allow it, and I thought it'd be fun to do a night of readings. And then little by little, I started reading the biographies, and his life was so fucking amazing that I just thought, okay, we'll make a one-man show. And so that's what I did. I wrote that, and it's full of his poetry, and found a guy in Richmond who liked directing one-man shows, and we did it, you know, and that's how it happened.
What was it like to, you know, you write it, but to actually get it into a theater and perform, and then be out there by yourself? You know, it's not like, yeah, oh, let me depend on somebody else. It's all you.
Yeah, it's pretty nerve-wracking. But I don't know. I have such a strong affinity for him that it really was just like coming home, doing him. When I listen to him and I watch him, it just, you know, I feel so close that it just felt like, okay, I'm just going to give my best, you know, channeling of him kind of thing. And it was a delight. It was so much fun to perform. There's a lot of body movements, you know, a lot of expressionistic stuff, and chanting and singing, and, you know, it was good fun. It was a good show.
So did you method act, or at least do method hair for the performance?
Yeah, I did method hair. The first few years I was doing it, you know, I had really long hair at that time, and so I shaved the top of my head and left the hair around back. And my wife is a wonderful person and a patient person, and so for a good 2 years, I was still walking around like an idiot, you know, with the shaved top of the head, you know. And but it was easier than trying to do like a headpiece, you know. And it was sort of methody to do that, you know, because, you know, De Niro gained all the weight for Raging Bull, and, you know, actors do stuff for their roles, so it was sort of like that too. So yeah, it felt very organic, felt very much like kind of becoming him for a little while, and it was just a pleasure to be him every night. Who doesn't want to pretend to be somebody that you really admire, you know? It's like dress up.
True. Now, if Embrace the Void ever does like a road show, would you be willing to go out with them and, like, you know, open and do your, you know, performance to get the crowd warmed up?
My son has had me wrapped around his finger for 32 years, so I would do that for him if he wanted it. I'm pretty pliable when it comes to Aaron, so yeah, of course I would do it. It'd be fun.
There you go.
We'd have a kick on the road, you know? Because when you do the Ginsberg thing, wherever you go, and I performed it around the country in a few different places, invariably people come up to you afterwards and tell you a Ginsberg story. Like I heard stories that I'd never read because people just came up and said, oh, I saw him one time and this thing happened and this thing happened, you know? So it's always sort of fun to take it out on the road because people, you know, identify and they have a story.
Excellent. Yeah, it is cool to kind of play that and be someone else, because then they are talking to a different version of you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you get to do stuff that you normally wouldn't do in real life. So it's fun.
Okay, back to day job talk.
Okay.
What is Gestalt therapy? And you can pronounce it better probably than I can.
Gestalt means...
Gestalt, like that, yes.
Yeah, it
Maybe
means...
if you're Absinthe, it's easier to do that thing. Gestalt.
Let's see.
Let's see. Repeat. 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're back.
Gestalt. Yeah, that's pretty good. Gestalt is a German word. It means whole. Okay. The Gestalt psychologists were guys who studied sensation and perception because they wanted to understand how a human taking in all of this data orders it into a meaningful whole. Okay. We don't perceive the world as it is. We construct out of it. You know, we organize it, we censor out certain data and amplify other data. So those were Gestalt psychologists that were part of the forerunner of Gestalt therapy. Then there were the existentialists, the existential philosophers, who believed in immediacy and authenticity and the internal lived experience of the individual, phenomenology, the attentiveness to one's feelings, thoughts, and perceptions, and conception of the world. Those guys were forerunners. Perls, Fritz Perls, who was the founder of Gestalt, was a Freudian analyst who got analyzed by Wilhelm Reich, who was into all this body work and breathing stuff I was talking about. And then he sort of was influenced by the existentialists, and he constructed this very dramatic enactment-based therapy where the focus is the present, here and now experience of the person. And then you look into that and you work with that and you get them to experiment with it, their breath, their thoughts, their feelings, their movements. It's very dramatic. They work with parts of themselves in dialogue or, you know, other kinds of creative enactment. It's very creative. You don't know where it's going to go. You sort of start with the person and you ask certain kinds of questions and the work unfolds between the two of you. So it was a very natural jump from theater for me. It was just like the stuff we did in acting.
It does sound a little bit like therapy is like improv.
It is therapy as
I mean,
improv.
you're doing the yes and the person on the other end isn't. You're kind of like going with them and seeing where it goes. Huh.
Exactly. It is yes and. That's why improv is such a cool mindfulness discipline, because it's also here and now based, and you have to work with what is rather than censoring it or saying, no, I'd rather it be this. And Gestalt is very much that way.
Now, is it ever uncomfortable for someone with like a Jewish background to use German terms like that? And why is German like, they have a perfect word for everything?
They have big ass words. They have those big construction words. And the existentialists had to invent big ass construction words because they were talking about ineffable experiences that we didn't have words for. But no, it doesn't bother me because Yiddish, my grandparents and my parents spoke Yiddish. Yiddish is the street language of Eastern European Jews, you know, Jews who were in Germany, Russia, Poland. It's a mix of German, Russian, Hebrew, probably Polish in there. It's their street patois. And so it sounds German to me. When I took German in college, I dug it, man.
Now, you're an actual lifelong atheist who's older than me. How does this happen?
Really? The Jews that I'm of a lineage from were the socialists and communists who came from Russia and Poland here in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. most of them had discarded religion. They saw the abuses of religion in their communities. They were intellectual, scientific-minded people, so they saw the supernatural aspects of religion as fanciful, and they were more interested in the ethical threads from Judaism about a socially just world, hence socialism and communism. And so my grandfather on my father's side was certainly a free thinker. On my mother's side, they were straight out communists, and so there was no religion at all. My grandfather on my father's side knew Hebrew, and he coached me in my bar mitzvah, but he was a free thinker. And my parents were certainly atheists, and I just never grew up without a question about the thing at all. You know, it was just a given for me. I didn't understand belief in supernaturalism.
So what is it about, I guess, Jewish culture that's unique in that it does seem that people still use the term even if they're not religious? Like,
Yeah.
what can other religions learn from the Jews when not trying to murder them?
Huh. You know, there's a book about that. The Dalai Lama invited a bunch of rabbis over to come talk to him about how you keep a people's thing alive in a diaspora, because they'd been chased out of Tibet by the Chinese. And there's a book called the Jew in the Lotus, about these rabbis coming and talking with the Dalai Lama. And Ginsberg has a chapter in the book. There's a chapter where the author talks to him. What was the question again? That was the absence.
It's more about the idea of people who are Jewish but not really religious anymore still are okay identifying as such and kind of keeping the cultural things, like you said, doing a bar mitzvah even though it's just for the presents. I don't blame anybody for that.
Right. No, it's a culture, man. You know, it's 2,000 years not just of religion but of historical experience. The experience of being in diaspora, chased around Europe, you know, the experience of being victims of, you know, bigotry, hate crimes and so on, Holocaust eventually. It is the folkloric culture, and that's different for Jews in Eastern and Northern Europe, who are the Ashkenazi Jews, the Jews in the Sephardic Jews down in Israel, Spain, North Africa have a different cultural kind of thing. But it's a peoplehood, you know? It's a peoplehood, far beyond, you know, belief in the religion, for sure. Culture, music, humor, stories, you know, all the folkloric stories, you know, all that stuff. That Fiddler on the Roof comes from stories by Shalom Aleichem, who was a writer. His name was Shalom Rabinowitz, actually, strangely enough. But his pen name was Shalom Aleichem. And all those stories, you know, about Tevye, you know, this guy just wrote about life in the village, you know.
Tradition, that's right. Tradition.
Right.
And coming out.
So.
Yeah, it's something that's good to remember. And also, you know, you talking about Jewish people in different cultures, there's this like assumption that Judaism is like one thing. So like this weird assumption that Christianity is one thing. We know it's very much not. And
oh God, no.
You can have this kind of shared background that at least connect you to at least a history.
Right, but it's not one thing, because like all definitions, Jews, that's a metaphor. There's no such thing as Jews. There's this large body of people and heritage, and all of them are different. All of our categories are human constructed metaphors that don't do justice to the actual territory. They're just maps, but they don't do justice to territory. This sort of dovetails with the non-dualism in Buddhism, actually. The idea of remembering that all of our categories of things are human imposed interpretations. There are no real categories. There are no real boundaries between things. But we cut it up with our analytic minds. We name stuff and we categorize stuff for various purposes. But if we believe our categories are truth and reality, we're making a mistake.
But a common mistake, I suppose.
Yeah, it's called reifying. Yeah, it's not a helpful thing to do, creates suffering.
Well, there's the controversial subject that I want to talk about tonight, as if narcissist president. That's not too controversial, at least in the circles who are listening to this. So for you, what does spirituality mean, and what does it mean to pursue this as someone who doesn't believe in the supernatural?
Okay. Spirituality is a very unhelpful word for what we're talking about, but we don't have a word that connotes what it connotes fully enough. So spirituality obviously has all the connotations of supernaturalism, right? Right?
Sure.
Okay. For me, when I use the term, and again, I just use it because it's shorthand, it means the intuitive, feelingful, meaning-oriented, philosophical, experiential realm, as opposed to the rational, logical, separation-making, category-making realm.
Yeah, you can't just always be putting things in the boxes, I guess. Or is it in a way like going with the roller coaster of life and just letting it take you where it's going to take you sometimes?
Yeah, you go with just the other part. It's just an anorexic form of living. You know, it's pretty starvation-based. It's all that fleshy and imagistic and feelingful and, again, meaning-based in terms of how we construe our world and ourselves in it and our relationships. Ethics, you know, what we think is good or a good way to be or how to be, all of that in there. That's, to me, what spirituality means. Again, an unfortunate word because that has spirit in it. And unless you mean spirit metaphorically, which I do, it has those supernatural things, which, you know, I can't digest. I believe it.
We can be too literal. I was thinking of the people who got the original stories from the New Testament. Like, I don't think they took it as literally as people do now. Some.
Word has it that originally nobody took these things as literally. That fundamentalism was invented in the 1800s. I don't know about that. You know, I'm not a biblical scholar, but my only use for all of that literature is for its metaphorical and allegorical value, and more specifically when it comes to mindfulness and Buddhism and non-duality, there are aspects of all of the religious traditions that include what you'd think of as the mystical thread, which is really consciousness work. It's pointing directions for what to do with our attention to experience different states of consciousness. So Buddhist meditators, the Christian contemplatives, the Sufis, this is the thread where the spirituality isn't about the stories as real historical events, but the more underlying instructions for how to view the world differently than that rational counting mind views it, basically.
And how do you, I don't know, tap into this? Because there is definitely a push sometimes in skeptical communities for like data, you know, facts, not feelings, which is, that's like kind of a right-wing thing now. It's sad. But to kind of detach yourself from that mindset, I guess.
Right. There is, by the way, lots of data about mindfulness and other what would have come from Buddhist meditative practices. There's tons of data, like 40 years of data, because they've been studying it since the 80s. But that aside, what was the question again?
We all transition to kind of a similar topic. So what can atheists or skeptical people get out of kind of a mindfulness practice? Will that be in that?
Okay.
Maybe slightly parallel to what we're talking about?
Well, let me give you like a very capsule version of where I came from with this, okay? Because that might give you some idea of how an atheist would get to this, okay? Because I was an atheist, and I am an atheist. So I went to college in the 70s. I read the Beats. I read Eastern philosophy. It was very popular. I did psychedelics. When you do psychedelics, if you're lucky, you have some experiences where all the standard conventional categories, rational imposed categories, kind of thin out, and you have experiences of what you might call oneness or unity, a sense of connectedness to everything, a kind of a melting and an opening of the heart, a sense of greater connectedness to people and things around you. That is extraordinary and very, very different from everyday role-based reality. So having had those experiences and read those guys, I started wondering, so what is spirituality? And I started reading and trying to understand, what do people mean by it? What do people mean when they say the word God? Because some people mean the guy with the beard in the sky, but lots and lots of people, including mystic theologians, mean something entirely different about that word. And so I sort of studied, and along the way, I just took up meditation because that was sort of what was on the plate, given that Eastern philosophy was the thing. And so I started meditating in college, and I on and off meditated for years and years. And then I started meditating more regularly in the 90s and started understanding the guts of Buddhist psychology. And that's a different way of seeing how we construe reality, but it's exceedingly accurate to what happens with humans inside. It's a very, very accurate picture. So, you know, for atheists who want to taste this stuff, the benefits are going to be less stress. I mean, that's sort of right off the top. Tons less stress because you drop into relaxed states, fight, flight. The fight, flight impulse in your brain goes down. You go into rest and repair and reflection. You become more perceptive about what you're motivated by, what your feelings are doing, what happens in here. The parts of the brain that light up when you meditate, the part right behind your forehead, it's called the prefrontal cortex, the newest part of the brain evolutionarily. That part also has to do with empathy. You tend to become less defended, more empathic, a little more loving. Not about Trump, of course, but normal people. What else? You see the world differently. You don't sweat as much of the small stuff. It's exceedingly pragmatic. Like, we've been through some crises in our lives, like illness in our family that was scary, harrowing fucking shit. And we were hitting the meditation pillow twice a day like we always do, and it was invaluable for walking through what was a terrifying existential experience. So it's exceedingly useful.
Well, how do you reach that mindset without psychedelics?
Oh,
just in case you don't happen to have any in the closet.
Right. You learn a little bit of the theory base, and you start meditating. That's it. And you sit and you meditate. Meditation's not that hard, honestly. It's hard at first because your task-oriented mind thinks, oh, I have to do something like I always do. I have to learn things and make the grade and achieve something great. But meditation is about just being, just sitting. And the rational task-oriented mind has a real problem with that because it wants to be doing a lot. So that's the hardest part of meditation, is realizing you have to kind of unhook from that and just abide in presence. And that's where stuff starts happening. A whole bunch of processes happen inside that shift your experience of the world and yourself.
Okay, I have to.
Any of that get through?
I have to bite here.
Okay.
We're gonna have to follow up with this. I need a meditation pillow, clearly.
You can just sit in a chair. It doesn't matter where the fuck you sit. You know, don't worry about any of that stuff. Breathe, how you sit. make it easy. You just sit and you sit and maybe you focus on your breath in and out. And when you notice you're not focusing on the breath, you come back to it. If you knew that and did that, that would be enough. Because everything else just happens for you when you do that. That's
good to have a starting point.
Yeah, it's really easy, man. I teach people to meditate in 1 hour in one session in my office.
Well, Aaron wants to know if you can sing the Do the Meditation song.
I
don't know if we've had singing in here before.
All right. Because I'm a little nervous, I'll pull up the text, okay? But if you want to do that, do you really want to do that? This was Ginsberg's. Ginsberg.
Well,
later in his poetic career, he got interested in lyric poetry, meaning musical poetry. And he did a lot of stuff. He did music with The Clash. He did music with Dylan. He did all these, Paul McCartney and so on. He wanted to see if he could build a song that would teach you how to do Vipassana meditation, but as a song. So that's the meditation rock. Do you want to hear that?
I think we must hear it now.
All right. So I'm going to pull up Microsoft Word, but I'm trusting that I'm still on camera when I do so.
I'll let you know if you go astray, but you can. It's not possible.
All right. I'll sing the meditation rock. Okay. Let me find it. I just don't trust myself to remember it because I'm too nervous being on camera. Okay. All right. If you want to learn how to meditate, I'll tell you now, because it's never too late. I'll tell you how, because I can't wait. It's just that great that it's never too late. If you are an old fraud like me, or a llama who lives in eternity, the first thing you do when you meditate is keep your spine, your backbone straight. Sit yourself down on a pillow on the ground, or sit in a chair if the ground isn't there. If the ground isn't there, if the ground isn't there, sit where you are if the ground isn't there. Do the meditation, do the meditation, do the meditation, do the meditation. Learn a little patience and generosity. Follow your breath out, open your eyes. Sit there steady and sit there wise. Follow your breath right out of your nose. Follow it out wherever it goes. Do the meditation, do the meditation, do the meditation, do the meditation. Learn a little patience and generosity, 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 yeah, generosity. I fought the Dharma and the Dharma won. If you see apocalypse in a long red car or a flying saucer, sit where you are. If you can't think straight and you don't know who to call, it's never too late to do nothing at all. Do nothing at all. Do nothing at all. It's never too late to do nothing at all. Do the meditation. Do the meditation. Do the meditation. Do the meditation. Learn a little patience and generosity. 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 Yeah, generosity. If you sit for an hour or a minute every day, you can tell the superpower to sit the same way. You can tell the superpower to watch and to wait and to stop and meditate, because it's never too late. Do the meditation. Do the meditation, do the meditation, do the meditation. Get yourself together, lots of energy and generosity, 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 yeah, generosity. There you go.
Okay, this is worthy of applause. I wish I had the applause button.
I hope that looked okay.
Now, see?
What?
You said you teach someone how to meditate in an hour.
Yeah, man.
You said in 58 minutes. That was like 2 minutes. There you go.
Meditation, man. Sit down and breathe. Not that hard.
Sit down and breathe. See?
Abide. Just abide. Just abiding.
Now, since we've talked about being calm and relaxed and all that,
yes.
Do you embrace your void?
Every day.
Every day.
From start to finish. So the void, I get so serious on you. Every time you ask a thing and it should be a joke, I give you a serious thing. Sorry about that. Void comes from Taoism. I didn't raise Aaron on Taoism. He got attracted to Taoism when he was growing up. The Tao Te Ching, right? Chinese philosophy. The void means everything there is out of which all of this arises. So it doesn't really mean empty in the sense of nothing there. It means undifferentiated, out of which our differentiations arise. Jess, Zach, drink, computer, audience. The void is the fertile ground of being, which in the theistic traditions is God, in the mystic theistic traditions, the ground of being. Paul Tillich, who was an existential Catholic, the undifferentiated ground of being. It's just the stuff out of which all of this arises. Consciousness, you could say. So yeah, I'm with my void every day. I meditate and I try not to reify things, and I try to slide between all the fucked up thoughts in my head and fucked up feelings and, relax my body and stuff. Try to kind of stay fluid. The void is about letting things fluidly rise and fall and not getting stuck and not getting tense and not getting, violent with ourselves and others.
Well, in these troubling times that we've discussed a little bit during this hour, is there a way for us to feel more connected with humanity, obviously in a way that's positive?
Yes. In the spiritual teachings, catastrophe, is where the growth comes from. In Christian teachings, learning the cross, when you're broken down and vulnerable and you've lost everything, is where the spirituality comes from, the compassion, the love, the vulnerability. So this past year, in this national trauma, the nation wakes up. Women, have come to the fore and said, no, 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 no. This has to stop, this cruelty. Our compassion for immigrants, our compassion for each other, our need to take care of ourselves during this horror that's going on to us. It's kind of, in the spiritual traditions, if you survive the horror, you grow from it, So yeah, that's what Aaron's show is about, is how do you live with what seems to the rational mind like unimaginably awful shit and use it as fertilizer. Shit becomes fertilizer. Did that answer your question?
Speaking of surviving the horror, how did you survive Godfather 3? Since we've talked about those movies.
Awful. God, it's poor Coppola. You got to know that he hated doing that. God, it's so awful. It's just formula. It's just, I have to make the money so I can make the films I really want to make. It's so sad.
So sad.
That's all I got.
Well, what's your, as someone who's, you're in a profession that practices, even though, you're doing your actual thing. How do you feel about how therapists are often portrayed, and I use the therapist, more of a mainstream word, in like movies and TV, things like maybe The Sopranos. I don't know if you've seen that, but probably.
Yeah. It varies. It comes and goes. You were joking before we got on air about how the therapists, often are sleeping with their patients, so that's not a very pretty picture of therapists. We're not supposed to do that. Some better than others. When I became a therapist, when I was going to be a therapist, when I was in grad school, one of my models, apart from Bill Murray in Ghostbusters and Allen Ginsberg, was Judd Hirsch in Ordinary People. Did you ever see that?
No, I haven't.
Oh, so it's about a young man who's really troubled, and he goes to this therapist. He's had a suicide attempt, and he goes to this therapist, and he goes in, and Judd Hirsch is in his office. His office has been burglarized, and so everything's broken, and he's just fucking around with like shit, radios and broken things on the thing, and he's talking to the kid, and he's completely relaxed and authentic. That was like a really good model for me. He's a really good guy in that film. So, sometimes they're really good. Sometimes they're portrayed really well. And sometimes, it's just way too smooth,
I was wondering, like Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting, where he, says, it's not your fault over and over again.
Yeah.
But it's a nurturing side of it.
Yeah, Robin Williams was good. People always say, like, oh, you like Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting, because I look like, I really like Hannibal Lecter. I don't know if that counts for anything.
That's one way to portray the, yeah.
He's one of my favorite therapists in movies.
He's one of my favorite therapists.
A really, really helpful archetype for me.
See what we're learning? Yeah.
When it comes to dealing with narcissists, Hannibal Lecter's your man.
Yeah, that's one way to deal with that kind of personality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, as we get toward the end, usually I'm like, hey, tell everybody about your show. Of course, your show less, but what are some of the shows you might listen to? I mean, I know you're related to someone, so you have to do another plug, but anything else that you're able to check out?
No, I'm new to the podcast world. You know, Aaron doing Embrace the Void, you know, I sort of have listened to a little bit, but I'd be happy to plug some books or things about either spirituality or Buddhism, if I'd plug those.
Yeah, definitely, because as I mentioned, I will get links for everything that I can get, including the show notes. But yeah, what do you got?
Okay. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance got me on my start on spirituality. I read it as an acting student. Just still resonates. Very, very powerful book. Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. Now, okay, Eckhart Tolle's been on Oprah a bunch and all that shit. Very, very, Power of Now is a thin, dense translation of Zen Buddhism. Very, very clear. Very, very useful. Changed my life. What else? Even Cowgirls Get the Blues. A lot of my spirituality is conditioned by people like Tom Robbins, who wrote Cowgirls. You know, it's sort of a fleshy, lusty, slightly Eastern, but you know, joyous kind of spirituality.
Wasn't that made into a not very good movie? From what I
horrible movie.
Hear.
Don't watch the fucking. I've never seen the whole movie because I watched the first 10 minutes and I couldn't stand it. The book is quite good. Otherwise, for Buddhism and spirituality, if you want to dip into non-dualism, which we didn't talk about, the Transparency of Things by Rupert Spira is pretty trippy stuff, pretty ear-stripping stuff. The Matrix trilogy has a philosopher's commentary. You can watch those 3 movies with Ken Wilber, who's a great Buddhist philosopher, and Cornel West, who's an African-American Christian philosopher, talking about the underpinnings, the philosophical underpinnings. Those are really good. That gives you some flavor.
Well, I guess technically, since there are 2 of us, it makes sense that we were dualists and didn't talk about non-dualism.
Yeah,
you just don't have time for everything. That's just the downside of this, you know, whole situation.
You can't get it all in. You know, luckily we have the moments keep unfolding. So that time.
That's true. There will be other moments. So as we get toward the end, now if you want to support this show. Be like Bobby, Hugh, Teote, Marissa, go to patreon.com/Zachrilege. Follow me on Twitter, Zachrilege. Let me see if I can spell it, even though I haven't had beer. ZACHRILEGE. And the Zachrilege Cast page, Facebook. Anything you wanted me to know, guests, tell me you love it, tell me you hate it, whatever. Zachrilege.cast@gmail.com. Again, thank you to Jessie for being on tonight. Let's be excellent to each other, and remember, content is king. Tip your waitress. And now Jessie will read us off.
All right.
With a Ginsberg poem.
Okay. So this is early Ginsberg, and certainly pertinent to this moment in our history, even though he wrote it in the mid-50s. But this will do it for you. Let's get it. America, I've given you all and now I'm nothing. America, $2.27. America, I can't stand my own mind. America, when will you end the human war? Go fuck yourself with the atom bomb. I don't feel good. Don't bother me. I won't write my poem until I'm in my right mind. America, when will you be angelic? When will you take off your clothes? When will you look at yourself through the grave? When will you be worthy of your million Christs? America, why are your libraries full of tears? America, when will you send your eggs to India? I'm sick of your insane demands. When will you reinvent the heart? When will your technicians get drunk and abolish money? When can I go in a supermarket and buy what I need with my good looks? America, after all, it is you and I who are perfect, not the next world. Your machinery is too much for me. I don't want to work for a living. You made me want to be a saint. There must be some other way to settle this argument. Now, Burroughs is in Tangier, and I don't think he'll come back, and it's sinister. Are you being sinister, or is this some form of practical joke? I'm trying to come to the point. I refuse to give up my obsession. America, stop pushing. I know what I'm doing. America, I haven't read the newspapers for months. Every day, somebody goes on trial for murder. America, I used to be a communist when I was a kid. I'm not sorry. I smoke marijuana every chance I get. I sit in the house for days on end without going out. When I go to Chinatown, I get drunk and never get laid. My mind is made up. There's going to be trouble. You should have seen me reading Marx. The American flag is absolutely meaningless to me, just as it was in the 30s. I won't say the Lord's Prayer. America, I have mystical visions and cosmic vibrations. America, I still haven't told you what you did to Uncle Max after he came over from Russia. I'm addressing you. Are you going to let your emotional life be run by Time magazine? I'm obsessed by Time magazine. I read it every week. Its cover stares at me every time I slink past the corner candy store. I read it in the basement of the Berkeley Public Library. Time magazine is always telling me about responsibility. Businessmen are serious. Movie producers are serious. Everybody's serious but me. It occurs to me that I am America. I'm talking to myself again. Asia is rising against me. I haven't got a Chinaman's chance. I had better consider my natural resources. My natural resource consists of 2 joints of marijuana, millions of genitals, an atom bomb, and 2,500 mental institutions. I say nothing about my prisons or the millions of underprivileged who live in my flower pots. My ambition is to be a president, despite the fact that I am a Catholic. Ah, America. How can I write a holy litany in your silly mood? America, free Tom Mooney. America, save the Spanish loyalists. America, Sacco and Vanzetti must not die. I am the Scottsboro Boys. America, when I was 7, my mama took me to a communist cell meeting. They sold us bupkit, a handful per ticket. A ticket cost a nickel, and all the speeches were free. Everybody was so angelic and sentimental about the workers. It was all so sincere. You have no idea what a good thing the party was in 1835. Scott Nearing was a grand old man, a real mensch. Mother Bloor made me cry. I once saw Browder Plain. Everybody must have been a spy. America, you don't really want to go to war, do you? America, it's them Russians, them bad Russians. Them Russians, and them Chinamen, and them Russians. The Russians are power mad. The Russia wants to eat us alive. She wants to take our cars from out our garages. Her wants to take our factories. Her wants to corrupt our college girls. Her wants to put us all in slave labor camps. Her wants to dictify us. Him big bureaucracy running our filling stations, that no good. Huh. Him make Indians learn read. Ha! Him need niggers. Ha! Her make us all work 16 hours a day. Help! America, this is quite serious. America, this is the impression I get from reading the newspaper. America, is this correct? Well, I'd better get right down to the job. Now, it's true. I don't want to join the army or turn lathes in some precision parts factories. I'm nearsighted and psychopathic anyway. But America, I'm putting my queer shoulder to the wheel. There you go.
Doubt even Bisque.